So Ryan, thanks so much for taking our little tour of Amsterdam and talking a little bit about what you're working on and what you're doing. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. So I'm Ryan Hallisey. I'm an engineer at NVIDIA. I work on building the infrastructure for GeForce Now. And, GeForce Now is a cloud gaming service. So kind of like what I say to people is, if you ever wanted to get access to a nice 3080 and stream Cyberpunk on it from your phone, you can use GeForce Now.
Nice. And it's available? Like you can go out and like pay for it now?
Yes, you can.
Sweet.
Yeah.
I may have to check it out more. Like I remember reading about it, but I had never actually kind of gone and looked at it. Because like I have kids and a job, and so playing a lot of video games is not high on my list of things I can do anymore, which is depressing. Yeah, so I know you just gave a talk. What was your talk about?
So my talk was about my experience as an end user of KubeVirt. So GeForce Now, the infrastructure behind it heavily leverages Kubernetes and KubeVirt. And so we went over kind of some of the use cases that we have and how we use KubeVirt, how we use Kubernetes, and how we like it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So do you code every day, or are you management now? Or are you?
No, I kind of do. Let's see. I do a lot of coding when I can, and do some architecting. And,
yeah. I was talking to somebody else earlier. It's like the only downside about being in the software world is a lot of us got into it because we like to code, and as you get more senior, you get to code less and less.
Exactly.
It's nice to be able to keep your hands dirty sometimes.
Yeah, I'm involved heavily in the community. Like I'm one of the maintainers of KubeVirt, and so I'm active in the community and contributing features, design proposals, stuff like that, and very active in a few of the SIGs in the community as well.
So I feel like I know this answer a little bit, so what brought you to kind of open source and or Kubernetes in the first place?
Well, so there's a lot of things. I mean, I like Kubernetes. So me personally?
You personally.
Me personally. Yeah. So for me, the project is really exciting. I mean, it's really cool because I like understand it. I sort of connect to it at a very low level as someone who like understands infrastructure and likes to build things and understand like what it takes to launch a workload on my local laptop, and think about like all of like the bash scripts that I ever had to deal with in order to launch that workload, and then I think about like why the Kubernetes does it. It's sort of like encapsulating a lot of the knowledge that people would go through, like all those experiences that you go through in order to actually launch a workload. Became like kind of a lot of the way I look at Kubernetes. I mean, you can think about like a deployment and stuff, right? Like I could create a deployment like resource if I wanted to. If I had like a bash job that's constantly running and is constantly replacing things, if I notice, watching events
something going down
on the bus, and right, like you could almost do this, and it's like, and so I kind of think of it like that. And so to me, as someone who's really curious and interested in building new and exciting things, it makes a lot of sense. And someone who's had a lot of experience in this area, so that was something that was really exciting to me, and I think that's why a lot of people are excited about it. They really connect to that part of Kubernetes, and that's really why the community is so exciting, and there's a lot of people here, and so it really kind of feeds the energy and why it's such an exciting project, and that's why I like being involved in the community. And kind of related, so what brought you to open source in general to begin with? Sure. For me, I always found it fascinating. I had, even before I contributed to my first open source project, I always thought it was kind of interesting to share my projects with people, and so I was well before I understood open source and really what it meant. But it was something that to me that I found it interesting when I had my friends and I had work that I wanted to show with them so they could use it. And what I didn't really realize is I was actually doing open source. I was building my own community of software, and so naturally, like when hearing open source and what, like there's a whole world of open source eventually when I graduate school, and I was like, well, this seems like something that I already do, and it seems like something I already like, so I'm really interested in this. I kind of wanted to give this a try.
That's cool. And so you were, and that was because I know you were at Red Hat, and so that's what kind of brought you to Red Hat?
Yeah, I had heard of Red Hat, and I had been familiar with Linux and familiar with Red Hat software, and so for me, Red Hat was like a dream. Like it was like, wow, this is the Linux place, and I definitely wanted to give this a try and work. This is the center of open source, so it was very appealing to me.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think it's funny, right? There's, at Red Hat, right? There's people who definitely are coming in kind of with a leg up, right? Where you actually know what Linux is, right? And have been using it or really interested in it. But then there's other engineers, right? Who like have very little to no experience with Linux, and they're like, they've heard of Red Hat, but it's just kind of interesting. But then, I would say a large majority though are coming in with, because they're passionate about, open source and Linux and, stuff like that. And it's really, quite cool to be able to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I see that a lot. I mean, like at Red Hat, in my experience at Red Hat, I saw that a lot. That was the thing you see is the passion for open source. It's very, very prevalent in the culture and how, and at the company.
I made a bit of a wrong turn, so we're doing a different tour of Amsterdam than I've done before, in error, because I got forced into a right turn that I didn't mean to get forced into. So that's why you're getting a little bit of a different tour.
Scenic route.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully we'll make it back to the correct route eventually. But that is why we have the nav going, because I don't know Amsterdam. But speed bump. So sorry, back to our regular scheduled programming. So where does kind of KubeVirt come into play? Like, so you said it's kind of involved in GeForce Now, but how does it kind of do that?
Sure.
Or what does it do there?
Yeah, sure. So what I tell people is like NVIDIA and NVIDIA and specifically GeForce Now like virtual machines, and it's virtual machines are a very popular solution, and we use them a lot. And so this idea of Kubernetes is out there as an ecosystem and a way of doing things, a microservice architecture using containers, and it's sort of, and there's all this big community around it. And so we like VMs, so let's try, can we go to this kind of model? Like, can we actually look at using a microservice approach in containers? So this was kind of the thought process, and so when looking at what our existing solution was, we still want to maintain the existing investment in using virtual machines. And so with KubeVirt provided the ability for us to actually go to Kubernetes and leverage the ecosystem, as well as continue to be able to run virtual machines. So it's a natural fit for us to be able to continue with that investment and get the best of, because we like Kubernetes. We kind of want to use some of the things around and Kubernetes has, and so we do that for some things and services that we have. We also like VMs, so we use KubeVirt to continue to run VMs.
Gotcha. Does and so I'm sure the infrastructure isn't just like those VMs, right? So is there do you get to take advantage of kind of the rest of Kubernetes? So in other words, do you have containerized components of the system that integrate with those pieces?
Yeah, we do. So we use with Kubernetes, we integrated all the layers, CNI layers and CDI layers, everything. We in the CRI layer, everything. So we're integrated all those layers, and then also we do have our own components. Like a lot of the stuff that came along, after we want to use this. We needed to come up with components to run as pods to work with our existing stack, and so pretty much all of that work was done as containers.
Okay.
Very little of it. Once we started using Kubernetes, it became we don't want to continue to use VMs for our management, our control plane. We want to try and get as much onto containers as possible and leverage Kubernetes.
Right.
So for a lot of the new stuff, I should say, is using containers, and so some of the stuff we've anything that we had used in the prior generation architecture, we even tried to move to a containerized workload. In some cases it works well, some cases it doesn't. It just is what it is. But it works for us. If we continue to keep VMs around, it's fine. But in cases that we find it fits, then we use it.
Right.
We use containers.
And so that's what I think is kind of most interesting of kind of talking to a user of the tool chain is and you've gotten that to work, right? So you can have those operating together, and it seems to consistently do what you want it to do in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've been able to get what we want out of it, and the thing that we I always say we really love about Kubernetes is that like I was talking about earlier, like being able to revive workloads, sort of have that ability for workloads to return when they fail, something that like that resiliency, right, that the platform offers. We really like that. And then in the community as well, like the feature velocity, and also the ability to contribute like to the existing velocity is also really exciting too. And we like contributing back.
Right. And so do you feel like, are you regularly contributing, features that you think are important and that you need back into the upstream?
Yeah. So we have influence in different parts of the community. Some in a little bit in Kubernetes, and then some in more in KubeVirt. And so like we've had some very specific ones, like with KubeVirt, we've done VSOC. We collaborated with Google to create VSOC and contributed back. We've created some new APIs in KubeVirt. We actually we call it virtual machine pools. It's like in AWS, it's like auto scaling groups, something like that. And we created that because it was perfect for how we do. It represents how we use our workflow. We have lots of VMs, and they come in and out constantly. We have churn, and so we kind of wanted to
you use like the golden image VM kind of model, where you have like one VM that's like stock, and then you spin them out when you need them.
Yeah, so kind of like we do, like we basically have images that we distribute throughout our zones, like whenever we have updates or changes to OS. And so we do that, and so we've contributed to the community a bunch of different ways. Those are just some examples, and we've got some other things, like even in the Kubernetes community, there's some colleagues that are working in different areas for and resource allocation and some other changes for other ways that you can make GPUs available in Kubernetes.
Yeah. And so, I kind of have been asking this from kind of a bunch of different perspectives, but like, so why do you think, do you think that Kubernetes, if it wasn't kind of an open source project, like what's the trade-off? Like what might be better or worse about it that you think, is a benefit to being open source, if there is one? Sure. So
I haven't really thought about it, but being open source, I think what it does is it gets, like I was saying, the velocity. I think the feature velocity, the developer velocity. There's just a lot of access to different ideas and use cases. And what we found is like when we look at the project, we see like 90% of a solution. Like we get a lot of things, right? And that's great. Like that's actually probably around what we want. And then like we want to do the rest. So like if it was maybe closed source, I don't know. I mean it could vary like and how we could want to approach it. But I mean we kind of like I guess the way you look at it is like we kind of like doing the management of the infrastructure. Like we like that, and we want to be responsible for. We don't want to like go and we sell GPUs and then go rent them from someone else. We want to actually want to put GPUs in our data centers and run them in the world class way, and that's what we do. And so it requires us learning new things and trying to make it work. So an open source solution is a perfect fit for us.
Right. Yeah. I was talking to somebody earlier that made a really interesting point. Was that when you look at software, right? Any software makes a whole bunch of choices that are like trade-offs between various things, and it's just kind of required, right? And you have certain biases around where those trade-offs should be depending on the use case and all this different stuff. Sure. But he was saying what was really interesting for him about open source was that he can look at the application that he's going to build on top of, essentially, and understand where their trade-offs and bias choices were, so that he can make in his code either similar or complementary choices, so that he can get really good pairing with the open source software that he'd never be able to do with proprietary software. I don't know, does that resonate with you? I thought it was super interesting.
Yeah, it does, because so here's a pretty simple idea. Like if I wanted to find the developer who contributed, I could find the developer.
Right, if you had to.
Him, right? I could get blame, right?
Right.
That's what it's there for, right? So I could find this person and I could look it up, and also with communities, you see like all the conversations are had on mailing lists and on other sort of IRC or Slack, whatever. Like it's out in the open, and so you can read all the context as much as you want and to see what the biases were, right? What was the context that went into this decision,
right?
And you can have a conversation with the person, and that usually that person, I mean, in a project that's open source is probably still around. If they're still maintaining that feature, it's likely the case. And you can talk to them about it and bring your own perspective and see if it makes sense.
Complain.
You can complain. Yeah, exactly. You could complain. And so, yeah, and then what can result from that? Well, it could be some new code, a new use case, a new direction, or maybe, you know, maybe it's like, maybe you were wrong. Like
maybe you understand.
Maybe you're.
Oh, I didn't think of that part.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe because the reason this person did it this way is because they were thinking like you were before, and now you just needed the conversation to get more context. So it's a well of knowledge. Like there's not just like the code itself, but the access to that information is so helpful for making decisions.
So one of the other things I think is interesting, and you know, especially coming from, you know, you spent some time at Red Hat, from you know, how much has open source contributed to your ability to write?
Oh, so that's a good question. So,
and I mean English, or you know, spoken word, not code.
Yeah, so that's funny. So I've thought about this before, like because as someone, I never really liked writing. Like it wasn't something that was my favorite thing. But I quickly learned that like you have to be really, really good with your communication over different channels, and not really, I mean, I wouldn't even say spoken word because like most of it's not. Like it's over text-based channels. Now you have to be really good at getting your point across and communicating exactly what you mean, or you're gonna have a hard time. Like it's really easy just because people, you know, time is finite, and as well as, you know, people's attention. So like, you know, how do you get someone's time to be able to communicate what you need, and also like how you get it so like you don't make people angry, or you know, make it seem like you're not listening to what they're saying. There's some nuances that are really important that go into, and I think it's like a skill, like learning. You can almost say like learning to communicate in the open source world is a skill. There's a way to do it, and it's not just like writing, which my writing has improved. Had to like in order to do it, but there's a style to it, and that's something that I definitely think my writing has improved over time.
I know, like from working at Red Hat, I know my writing got a lot better. You know, and I find it really interesting that, you know, that's certainly not something they teach you when you're in college, right? That you're you know, that your code will that, you know, your computer science degree is going to revolve around a lot of writing, you know, or and what I have also found when I got like into management and stuff too, is like, oh, I also have to be able to read contract law, you know, and it's kind of funny how all these other skills are also required.
Yeah, what I always say to like junior devs is like, you can communicate through your code, and that's valuable in and of itself, but your code is not enough. Like it's just one tool that you have in order to be successful, because a feature isn't just code, and it's one of the things that you teach junior developers. It's like it's much more than that. It's you have to explain yourself, you have to explain where you're going, the purpose of this, you know, what it is that you know, that your design is, everything like that. It's so much more than just the code, and you see that sometimes in open source projects, and this is like one of those gaps that always that always drives me nuts. Like you see someone show up and they just drop code off, and then just it's like, no, it's not going to work. Like what is that? Like how as someone who's reviewing this and who works in the community, how do I feel about this? I don't feel really great about this, because, you know, well, what does this mean? Like, are you, like, is this perspective, like, is this right? Like, I don't fully understand where you're coming from on this. Your code means something to me, but I can't read everything, that all of your desires from just your code. You need to talk to me about it, and I also need to understand how you want to maintain this, because it's there's that too. So it's more, and it's almost like a relationship you have to build, and that's part of it.
Yeah, one of the things, you know, so I try to convince the students of, right, is that I'm like, you know, one of the most valuable things you can probably do while you're in college, you know, you have, in the grand scheme of things, you have a relatively large amount of free time, right? And so contributing to some, you know, important open source projects in literally any way will do wonders for your, not only kind of your resume, just to kind of show up for, you know, in context, but like your ability to communicate, but also like really the big thing is, for me, if I'm hiring somebody, seeing that they contributed to an open source project and had their code actually accepted, means that they not only can write the code, right, but they can communicate about it. They can, you know, I jokingly refer to it as like they can play well with others, provably, you know, and it's such a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, students, listen up.
Right, exactly.
You can contribute to an open source project out there. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely. I agree. There's a skill to it, and it's something that really anyone who understands or is interested in coding can do. It's something and can learn. It just takes a little bit of practice,
right?
And a little bit of trying it out, and you can get a feel for it.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things I learned, but this was even back in consulting, is like, you know, make sure you have somebody else read your stuff. You know, often, you know, when it's those important emails or whatever, if you can convince somebody else to read it first and make sure they understood what you wrote, you know, in the way that you intended them to, that can be a big help.
Yeah, that's a good. I read it out loud. I read it out loud myself.
Yep.
That's the other one I found to be helpful, because we hear it.
And you're like, oh my God, this is...
When it's not in your head and it's through your ears, there's something different about that.
I sound insane. Totally agree with that. I do that as well. So that's... I totally with you. We're... Sorry, it got a little dicier there with people trying to cross the street. What other, you know, how much involved are you in other parts of Kubernetes? Is it primarily KubeVirt, or are you working with other components that you yourself are looking at?
Sure. So mostly my time has been split into KubeVirt, and then I try to like get involved in other areas, but it's been hard for me too. I'm hoping, like, since I do a lot of work in KubeVirt as part of the scalability group, that we can eventually like work with the Kubernetes scalability group. KubeVirt might be one of the only projects that has an entire SIG dedicated to scale.
Right. Yeah.
So, and I know Kubernetes does, so it's like I'm kind of thinking like maybe we should, you know, we can meet up and talk more about it. So I was actually at the conference able to meet with one of the maintainers of that group. So and we're gonna try and meet up in the future. So I'm hoping that like that's another way we can get involved, because I actually think we can learn a lot from each other, where KubeVirt is very focused, its scale is focused on like our goal is focused on the control plane and scaling the control plane, like being like a good member of the Kubernetes cluster. It's important. It's an add-on, so you need to be a good member of the cluster. Well, it's a different perspective with Kubernetes. You're talking about pods and nodes and how many you can get and how they perform and so on. But in reality, like the scalability of Kubernetes or KubeVirt heavily depends on Kubernetes, because all the stuff, like once you get to a point where like provisioning storage and network and all that stuff, we have no visibility. Like we're looking at just KubeVirt, but we want to know. Like I have people ask me like, okay, how long does it take for me to provision a VM if I'm using Ceph? I have no idea. But like we could maybe find that out. Like if we you know took our perspective in the way we measure currently in KubeVirt and maybe come up with some new ideas. Maybe there's a way we can kind of, you know, find a way to do this, and so then we can so I can eventually answer that question and help them too. Right.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I mean, and you're also, I mean, you're bringing a real use case to scale. Right, and so I think that's also kind of benefit. You know, you can kind of hear other perspectives. It's kind of like everything else with the, you know, everyone has slightly different goals, and so the more you kind of talk about it, the more you start to see where the similarities are and where the differences are. Especially ones where, like, at least for me, a lot of times is the most interesting bits are like where I thought something was obvious, and I was either wrong, like it wasn't true at all, or nobody else thinks it's obvious, because for whatever reason, the thing I'm working on makes it very obvious, but what most people do, it's not, right? And so that's one of the things I find really interesting when you're having kind of those kinds of conversations with other people who are kind of using the same tool chain.
Yeah, I know that. I know the feeling. Like sometimes you just different perspectives, and you know sometimes you have different contexts. So really aligning on things, all the time you go through that, and when you have conversations about features or bugs.
Right. So one of the things, you know, the show is called KBE Insider. What do you see in KubeVirt or wider Kubernetes, you know, in 6 months or a year that you're kind of most excited about? What's the, you know, what do you think is going to happen next that'll be really cool?
Sure. So there's like two specific things that I'm really interested in. One is this the DRA feature. It's called dynamic resource allocation. There's a guy from NVIDIA who's been working on this and pushing in the community. It's really exciting for us because when we do provisioning now with the device plugin, the design of the device plugin and what it's really meant to do is it's meant to serve. I'm going to provide a GPU for a VM or a container, but I'm just going to provide it as pass-through. I'm not going to be able to also switch dynamically between pass-through and vGPU based on the workload that's coming in. And this is actually how we want to run our data centers. Is we actually want to, because we think about capacity, right? We have a physical device, and depending on who wants access to it, we could be provisioning it as pass-through, or we could be providing it as a vGPU.
Yeah.
And so it really depends on what we get. So we really need to switch through both, through each type. But we really can't do that with the limitation. So with DRA, this feature, we will be able to actually do this properly, which is really exciting for us because it's going to help us solve a huge number of bugs and race conditions we currently have to work around this.
Yeah.
And also, like, it's going to improve our capacity. So that's something that's really exciting.
And you'll have a community maintained piece of software that's doing it rather than the one that you home grew, right?
Exactly. So that's one of them. The second one is some of the HPC work I'm hearing about. Like, I think one of the things, like, for us that we really care about is being able to do HPC workloads, high performance computing, and things like CPU pinning, but doing it in a very specialized way. Like, a lot of the solutions that exist today that are maintained by the community are they're sort of they're very general. Like for example, I only want to provision one whole CPU to this application, or 2 CPUs of this. Well, there's a whole world of different configurations that you can think of, and that's where we feel like there's a lot more work that can be done. And so I'm hoping that there's going to be some work, and at least from what I'm hearing, is that there's some work to, for either some plugins or extensions to be able to actually get down and get more control at the to enable high performance computing loads, maybe you get L3 cache memory bandwidth controls, things like that, like specific access. Like, let's look at the CPU and let's break it down into chunks, but let's do it using the Kubernetes API. Let's not
reinvent it.
That's what that's what I'm looking forward to seeing.
Interestingly, I was talking to a guy from Huawei, Kevin Wang, who's involved in the KubeVirt community, but he's also working on a project called Volcano. Have you heard of this?
I haven't.
So you should check it out. But it's basically it's kind of bringing trying to help solve scheduling problems for AI scenarios, and having different kind of schedulers. But it's kind of related to what you're talking about, of kind of saying, hey, I want to prioritize how things happen differently when I'm doing this kind of workload, so I don't know. I think there's potentially some interesting stuff there for you.
Okay.
I hadn't heard of the project either. I was like, oh, that's really kind of neat. But then again, I have this weird interest in schedulers that I don't know why, but I've always been really interested in them and never really gotten sat down and worked on them. I just think they're neat.
You must be an old school Linux guy.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I've been a Linux guy for a long time now. Yeah. I still remember installing, literally having a stack of floppies like this. I don't know if the camera can see me, but 25 floppies, to install. I just blanked. What's you know what I'm talking about? The
old versions of RHEL.
Well, yeah, no, before that, or the off the shelf one. VBATS was one of the maintainers for a long time. God, I can't believe I'm blanking on it. It starts with an S. But it used to be a super popular distro, but it's not so much anymore. And it used to come on CDs in the back of magazines, but in those days it was you had to pay attention to the settings for your monitor, because you could literally light it on fire, if you didn't set the resolution right. God, I can't believe I can't think of the name of it.
You're the Linux desktop and can light your monitor on fire.
Right. Every year for the last 20. It's actually one of the big things. That's what kind of got me involved with Boston University to begin with when I was at Red Hat, was trying to look at, I wanted to know what student developers are doing today, right? So that I could try to figure out what could we add to the Fedora desktop to really enable developers. It's Mac, has been a lot of the developer desktop in recent history, but it's, at least for me, right, it's almost by accident, right? It's that they have a terminal, so that's a huge win. But then is it, but but then it just has a good UI and it doesn't break, right? But is it really bringing that much to the table about developer enablement, and like could we bring that to the table in Fedora, which I always thought would be really cool, you know, and just like how much, you know, I was talking to somebody else too about this new concept of, not new, but newish platform engineering. And so what can we do in platform engineering in the, you know, in our laptops to actually enable engineers much better, right? Because I think there's so much opportunity there that we're so busy trying to make sure that your email works, that we don't, you know, kind of go kind of sideways, and like, what can we do for like developer tooling, you know?
Yeah, no, that's cool. I still remember like when the first time that I got access to Linux. I don't even know if it was like, I think it was Fedora or something. I'm not even sure anymore.
Yeah.
But I just oh no, I know what it was. It was like it was a RHEL 3 machine in a lab. That's what it was. It was a RHEL 3 machine, and I was like, I just thought it was really cool because I just remember the terminal, and I remember the UI and working my way around there, and that was fun. Those were good memories.
Yeah. I was very proud of the fact I had a Spark 10 on my desk for a while. You know, and so that was always pretty cool. But yeah, I was Linux and Unix, but I was a Windows programmer for many years too. So you know, who knows? So what are you kind of most excited about with KubeCon? Is this you've been to other KubeCons?
Yeah, I've been to, I think this is my third or my fourth. I'm not.
Okay.
I don't even know. I lost count. But I was always excited about just talking to some of the contributors. I mean, there's some people. I mean, every time I come here, there's some people like I know that I'll see. But then there's always some other people that you just you haven't, and you kind of run into them and meet them for the first time when you see their names on one of the talks, and so that's always cool to see. And there's a few people that I was glad to have conversations with here.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that's cool. And so how long are you staying for? Longer than the conference, or are you just flying home on Saturday or Friday or something?
I'm flying home on Friday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you get to see the tulips?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Someone has told me that I need to go, but I don't know if I'm going to make it though, because I'm flying out tomorrow morning, and you're supposed to go in the morning because apparently it's packed.
Yeah.
But I saw some pictures, so I'm like, okay, well.
Yeah, it's supposed to be kind of a sight to behold, but I'm kind of in the same boat. Although I'm not flying out I'm flying out Saturday afternoon, so I was thinking about trying to see if I could do it tomorrow at some point. But there's also like, it's like a scheduled event. Like I can't just like roll up when I have a free minute. I have to go, and like it's a commitment. And when traveling, especially for a conference, making commitments to much of anything is very difficult.
Yeah.
I end up like I'll often have this long list of talks I want to go to, and then not get to a single one.
Yeah.
So that's cool. And you said you're in Connecticut. What do you think? You're going back there, and then you'll go to the next KubeCon, or are you going to go to anything in between?
Yeah, probably the next KubeCon. I really want to submit a talk. I'll probably do another. So this time was an end user panel. At some point I'll submit a talk and talk about like a deep dive about like our infrastructure at GeForce Now at some point. I'm sure people will be excited to see that. So at some point will submit a talk for it. But I'm just trying to find the right time. It's going to work with everything with my schedule and everything that's going on. But so either in Chicago or the next one in wherever that is. Can look for that.
Chicago's a good town, so
I've never been, but I've heard.
Yeah, my brother lives there, so I've been a few times. But it's a good place to go. Cool. It's funny how different it is than Boston, because like all the streets are really wide, and most people like follow the driving rules, and nobody crosses the street without a light. It's just like all the because I assume you spend a lot of time in and around Boston.
I know. Well, see, this is the thing in New York City. It's the same way. Like there's no rules when it comes to like crossing roads and stuff. I think some of that got into the Boston different cultures.
Yeah. Well, supposedly, and I believe this to be true, but the term jaywalking was actually invented in Boston because there was an advertising campaign by the auto industry because traditionally, right, roads were actually for people, not for cars. And when the cars started to come out, they wanted to get people onto sidewalks and stuff. So they did an ad campaign of, look at those Jays walking in the street, and Jays being like fancy people, and that's where jaywalking comes from, supposedly. So,
Cool.
well, so why don't we say, thanks so much for coming. It was really lovely to talk to you. I hope we can do this again sometime. Maybe in Chicago, maybe somewhere else. And, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's fun.
And hopefully you enjoyed your little tour of Amsterdam. Some parts of it we hadn't seen before.
Yeah, the scenic routes. We almost made it to the tulips.
Yeah, right, probably. Yeah. I don't even know what direction they're in. So we should have thought about that as our route. It's like just drive out to the tulips and come back again.
Yeah.
That would have been cool.